that in between lessons I went ahead and tweaked the weighting in a few areas on the model. We didn't really have much work to do as far as that's concerned, so we can work with the same tools we learned in the previous lesson to take care of that task quickly. I'd also like to point out that if you ever wanted to, let's say, remove all of your weighting information entirely, it's really simple to do that. Just go to your deformers viewport, go ahead and grab all of your normalizing folders and simply trash them. So with them all highlighted, you can go ahead and hit the delete key, and now they are removed. No longer will we see deformations when our joints rotate. Sweet. So I just wanted to point that out to you. But now it's time to go in and start building control objects. So you can see we're on the home stretch now. The first one we will make is the global control. Now, why would we start there? Well, keep in mind all controls are going to be connected to this global node. So we might as well start at the foundation and build from there. So that said, let's say we do this. We'll go in and create a locator. We can do that a few ways. We can go ahead and click on the locator button here at the top left, or we can use the hotkey L, which is something I prefer to use. It's just a little bit faster, right? Let's go back to our items viewport and scroll down so we can find our locator. Now it's time to rename it. Let's go ahead and come up with a naming convention that works, something that's concise. What we'll do is use anim for our prefix for all controls. That would make sense, right? And then we'll go ahead and finish out the name with global. So this is the item's ID. This is what it's used for. Alright, sweet. Now we can change its display to something that's easy to select. Let's head over to our display viewport. We'll go to shape and choose custom. You can see by default our custom shape is a box, but we can change that to whatever we'd like in this list. Let's go ahead and choose plane. Let's make sure it projects in the y-axis so it's along the grid so we have an idea of where the floor is. Alright, awesome. And then once we've managed to do that, we can then go to style and switch this to replace to hide the locator's shape. Alright, wonderful. So we just have the plane now. How would you increase its size? We can go to your size properties here. You can go ahead and lock down one axis so you can adjust all axes simultaneously. So we can start to increase this so it kind of wraps around the character's feet a bit more. Something else to point out to you is that if you wanted to, let's say, remove this solid look, all you'd have to do is go ahead and uncheck solid and you're good to go. How would you recolor this though? That would be a good idea, especially when we start to create controls for either half of the model. It'd be good to color code those in case you work on a super complex animation and you're trying to figure out what control belongs where, right? Very helpful for animators. So to recolor your control, you'd simply head over to your 3D items tab under the display viewport. From there, go to add draw options. Once you've clicked on that, now you can change your wireframe color. You'll also notice that you can change your fill color if you decide to keep the shape filled in, if you decide to work with a solid. I'll go ahead and switch the wireframe mode to user. Now you can see by default we work with a color of white, but we can go ahead and change that to whatever color we would like to use. So in this case I might go ahead and stick with red for all controls at the center of our model. So let's say we go ahead and zero out the other channels. We'll simply left click and drag to do so, or if you go ahead and click on the color itself, you can get to your color palette and choose the color that you'd like to use. Alright, sweet. So there's our global node, looking great. Something else to keep in mind is that we should make sure our values are zeroed. That way it's easy to go back to this neutral pose to reset the character if we ever need to. Alright, nice. So things are looking great. Here's what we need to do now. We basically need to go ahead and take our skeleton and connect it to our global node. So we can go ahead and parent the root. Go ahead and grab the root. Go ahead and grab the global node and then press the P key. So now it has been nested underneath. And you'll see that when we start to grab the global node and transform it, let's go ahead and start to move that around. You can see how the model will now follow. If we start to scale, let's grab the scale tool with the R key. You can see we're starting to get more control now. Chances are we'll want animators to scale in all axes instead of, let's say, one plane or two planes, unless you're doing something cartoony. But that's the beautiful thing about control objects. We can get really creative with them and design them in a way that allows the character to perform the way we envision the character to move about in our environment. Alright, sweet. You can see we can reorient the character as well using this node. So if the character needs to, let's say, walk on a ceiling, if we're doing something as cool as that, or perhaps we need to constrain the character to a moving surface, well, we now have a control that we can use to have that happen. Neat. So that's basically it for our global control. Now, to organize the scene a bit more, I'd like to go ahead and take all of our geometry, and I'd like to go ahead and press Ctrl G to group them into one node. That way, everything's organized, right? We can then go ahead and take this group here and we can rename it. We can call this model. Fantastic. Now, this should not transform. We do not want this to move at all because we'd run into double transformations. If we were to go ahead and select that model group, grab our global node and start to translate, take a look at what happens. You can see how the mesh starts to separate from its skeleton. This is known as double transformations, simply because the mesh is being influenced by two different sources. So we have to be really careful about that. And we will learn how to lock channels to prevent things like this from happening. But that will be done later on in the course. So that's it for this lesson. That way we can move the entire upper body. Let's go ahead and press the L key to create a locator. From there, underneath our display viewport, we'll go to Locator Shapes. We'll switch the shape to Custom. Let's go ahead and switch Style to Replace to hide the locator's shape. And then for this custom shape, we can work with Circle. That way it wraps around the pelvis nicely. And then at this point, I'd like to go ahead and make sure it projects in the y-axis. Alright, sweet. Now we can use a drop action, let's say match position, to align this to the root bone. Great. Now remember, we're using red for all objects at the center of our model. I would like to keep the fill color, but instead what we can do is kind of change the rim color or wireframe color of the control. So with it selected, we'll go to 3D items. We'll click on Add Draw Options, and we'll change our wireframe color to red. So remember, let's go ahead and switch the mode to user, and we'll zero out G and B, leaving us with R, or red. Alright, cool. Now that we've done this, we'll go ahead and rename our controls. So with the item highlighted, just go ahead and click once, right here in the items viewport, or if you'd like, you can rename from your properties viewport. Either way, let's go ahead and call this anim underscore COG. Alright, sweet. Now take a look at something. You can see how we have some very messy positional values. The problem with this, of course, is if we wanted to reset our character, bring it back to this neutral position to make changes to the rig, or perhaps it's easier to start our animation from here. Either way, if we try to reset this, you'll notice that the control is going to shift to the origin. So of course the character center is going to do the same thing once we connect it to the control. Not good, right? This is why we want to go in and zero out our transforms. Alright, cool. Let's go ahead and now take this control and parent to our global node, so everything's connected. Alright, sweet. Once we've managed to do that, we can then duplicate this object and we'll use it for our next control. So that'll be Control D. Let's get this renamed. That's going to be anim spine A. Alright, cool. Once we've done that, again, we'll use our drop action to align its position to the next joint. From there, I'd like to go to the display viewport, and I'd like to go ahead and hide the fill color. Let's go back to locator shapes, and we'll uncheck solid. Now it's very easy to differentiate between our upper body controls and the center of gravity control. Alright, sweet. Now, while we're still underneath locator shapes, let's go ahead and drop the radius of this so it wraps around this section of our model a bit better. Great. And then at this point, we can go ahead and duplicate this control. Let's go ahead and match this to the next joint. Let's get this renamed. So that's Anim Spine B. We'll duplicate this again, and we'll bring this to the chest bone. And let's go ahead and get that renamed. So that's Anim Chest. Alright, sweet. So once we've done all of this, we can then go ahead and create an FK hierarchy. So let's go ahead and take the chest and parent that to spine B. Another way to parent is by left-clicking and dragging. We can now go ahead and take spine B and parent to spine A, and then spine A will be parented to the center of gravity. So now when we grab the global node, take a look, everything's going to move. When we grab our center of gravity control, the upper body will move. And then when we start to animate the other controls, take a look as we start to add some rotation here, and see that everything's working wonderfully. So we'll get some really nice control out of this. Fantastic stuff. Let's head over to our properties viewport just to check out our values. And as you can see, a few are kind of messy. So a fast way to clean this up is to go ahead and grab the center of gravity control. At this point, we can right click inside of the items viewport and choose select item hierarchy. And now it's just a matter of going to 0 and choosing all. Sweet. So that takes care of that. That also finishes this lesson. So in the following lesson, I'm going to go ahead and show you how to connect to build these systems, simply because that will help prevent our joints from shifting out of place, as long as we do this correctly. Let's enter into setup mode, and the first thing we'll do is parent our root bone to our center of gravity control. Now, when we exit setup mode, take a look at what's going to happen. You can see how the root is going to shift out of its original position, simply because there's one step that we need to consider. Let's go ahead and undo back with Control Z. Let's go ahead and open up the center of gravity's hierarchy so we can go ahead and find the bone that we've just parented. Here it is. And take a look. Under our properties viewport, you'll notice that we have offset values. So this is why the spine shifted. In order to prevent that from happening, we simply need to zero out our joint. And now you'll notice that this is our new starting point. When we exit setup mode, nothing shifts out of place. Sweet. Let's go ahead and grab the center of gravity control and we'll start to translate. We always want to test our controls, so that looks great. Let's add some rotation next. I might go ahead and use local mode, just so we can quickly go in and rotate this around by left clicking and dragging. Sweet. So all is well. It's now time to rig the other spinal joints. Now how is this going to work? Because we don't want to unparent them from the roots hierarchy to connect them to our controls. That would essentially break our skeleton, which is not good for game characters. Now if you're working on, let's say, a film rig, you have a few more liberties than you would with a game rig. But let's go ahead and make sure that what we build here is very clean. So instead of parenting our joints, we can work with constraints. Now, in order to get this to work, we should create intermediate objects that our joints will be constrained to. The beautiful thing about these intermediate objects is that they will be matched to the position and orientation of each joint. This will prevent our joints from shifting once the constraints are applied. And then we can go ahead and parent these intermediate objects back to our controls. And that's how the system will work. Let's go ahead and get to it. We could always work with a locator as our intermediate object. Let's press the L key to create it. And then from there, we'll go ahead and switch our drop action to match, so we can match the transforms of this locator to our spinal joint. So that's going to be spine A. That's what we'll align to first. And take a look at what has happened. If we were to go to our properties viewport, you can see that we now know the world position and world orientation of the current joint. Neat. So in this case, we can use this information to set up a constraint in a very clean way. Again, one that will prevent shifting. Sweet. Let's go ahead and get this locator renamed. That's going to be LOC_DRV_spine A. Now, we'll duplicate it with Control D, and let's go ahead and bring this over to spine B. And yes, that rhymed. Cool. We'll go ahead and now rename this, so that's going to be spine B. We'll duplicate once again, and now let's go ahead and align to the chest. Once we've done that, we'll change our suffix to LOCDRV chest. Alright, sweet. So now we can basically work on our constraints. Let's go ahead and jump to our modifiers tab. Alright, cool. What I'd now like to do is go ahead and show you what would happen without these locators, just to make it clear. I'll grab the chest bone and shift select our chest control. Now let's apply a rotation constraint. You'll see that the chest bone is going to shift because, again, the orientation of the chest bone does not match with the orientation of the control we've just constrained it to. And that's why we are using these locators. Let's go and undo back with Control Z. We'll enter into setup mode. We'll select the chest bone. We'll then go ahead and control click its locator. We'll apply a position constraint. That's going to allow us to stretch the spine. And though it's a rudimentary way of creating a stretch system, we'll still get some really cool results. And then if you'd like to create a better spinal rig that allows you to hold volume as you stretch the spine, you can build a more elaborate spinal system. And that's for another course. But do mind you that with this approach, again, we'll still get some really cool results, and we'll see that soon. Alright, so that's one constraint down. Let's go ahead and grab the chest bone again. We'll control click our chest locator so we can apply the rotation constraint. Fantastic. Now to test this out, we'll exit setup mode. We'll grab our locator, not the control just yet, but the locator. And we'll start to translate, and as you can see, take a look at that. We're starting to kind of pull the spine. Let's see what happens when we start to add some rotation. So we'll press the E key, we'll start to left click and drag, and all is well. Fantastic. Alright, so we need to do that for the other two joints. Let's enter into setup mode. We'll grab spine B, we'll control click its locator, we'll apply a position constraint. Let's control click spine B again to apply the rotation constraint. And then there's just one more. So with spine A selected, we'll get to work on constraining that joint. Sweet. And now we can go ahead and take each of our locators and parent to their controls. So there's one, there's two, and one more, the chest. Alright, fantastic. Let's go ahead and exit setup mode. Again, nothing shifts out of place. And as you can see, when we start to move our controls now, hey, take a look. Our spine now follows. How exciting. And again, we can translate these controls. Sweet. So this will be really fun for animators then. If they need to kind of pull the spine just a bit further, they have the control to do so. Nice! Well, that's basically it for this lesson. In the following lesson, I'd like to go ahead and show you how to clean this up a bit more, just so we can start to kind of finalize this process and we know how to then finalize the other sections that we'll need to rig. So we'll go through and learn how to kind of lock certain channels just to prevent animators from using channels that they shouldn't use, and we'll also make sure to hide our scale channels. Typically, you won't scale any of these controls. You would scale your global node. Well, let's say if you were working on a more stylized rig, you might then provide animators with a way of scaling your torso. And you'll learn how to do just that when we rig another part of the body, when we get into setting up a type of system to roll the character's feet. You'll know how to use that same technique to connect your scale into each control. But again, we won't do that for this system. It's not necessary. So how would we go about locking these channels down? With the center of gravity selected, let's go ahead and grab all three scale channels. We can go ahead and double click to grab the entire scale list. And then with them highlighted, we can now create a group. So we'll go to our groups viewport and choose new group. Let's go ahead and name this channel underscore lock. We'll make sure our mode is set to from selected channels. And now we can choose OK. Do keep in mind that if you had no channels highlighted, you'd get a warning that says, hey, there are no channels added to this group just yet, but the group will still be made. Let's go ahead and expand the group and take a look. We have a few channels that have been added. Now, if you ever want to remove any of these channels, it's just a matter of highlighting the channel and choosing remove channel from group. So I've just removed the x-axis of the center of gravity control. How do we add it back? Well, with the control selected, we'd go ahead and grab the axis to add. We'd make sure our group is selected. Let's go ahead and control click the channel lock group. And now we can go ahead and right click and we can choose add channels. When we scroll down, you'll notice that the x-axis has been added back. Nice. So let's go ahead and add the scale channels of our other spinal controls. So there's spine A. I'll go ahead and double click to grab the entire list. You'll notice that our group is still selected. So we can go ahead and right click and we can choose add channels. Sweet. Alright, so there they are. Two more controls. So again, we'll go ahead and select the control, double click, and then we'll go ahead and right click on our group and choose add channels. Nice. Alright, one more control. Let's go ahead and take care of that. We'll right click and choose add channels, and now we'll go ahead and make sure that everything has been stored. Sweet. So what can we do with this now? Well, let's go ahead and right click on our group, and from there we'll go down to members locked and we'll choose on. So watch this. You'll see that we have now managed to disable our scale. When we try to scale this control, it's not going to happen. Let's go ahead and grab our scale tool. Let's start to pull at any one of these handles. It's not going to work. And if we turn off the local coordinate system, you'll see that it will actually template the scaling manipulator, whereas the others are free for animation. Cool. So that's working out very well. And this is one way of adding clarity to our rig, so animators know that, hey, we're not supposed to scale these at all, but we can translate and rotate. Neato. Alright, so that's one step down. I'd now like to create a group that will be used to hide all of these systems that work in the background. Remember those locators that we made for the character's spine? Well, we can go ahead and grab those locators and have them stored in a group we'll name hidden. That way, when we're ready to kind of clean things up, we'll simply hide that group, and thus our rig will be more presentable. So we can go ahead and shift select all three, and with them highlighted, we can head over to our groups viewport and choose new group. This will be from selected items, and we'll go ahead and call this hidden. Now when we choose OK, take a look, we can go ahead and find the group. There it is. We can now right click and choose members visible and set this to off. Nice. Great, so we have a way of doing that for not only those systems, again, in the background, but we can do that for the skeleton as well. And take a look, when we go ahead and hide that, we're left with the model and the control system. So that's the goal by the end of this. All right, let's go ahead and bring those back because we're not quite done just yet. We have a few more things to rig, right? Let's go ahead and bring back the hidden layer as well. Sweet. We should also create a group for our controls because eventually we might want to hide those as we start to animate. Let's say if we finish our performance and we don't want any distractions, so we can go ahead and hide those control objects to just focus on the character's performance. So with all of these selected, we'll create another group and we'll name this controls. Sweet, let's go ahead and choose OK, and we're good to go. So that's going to finish out this lesson. Now in the following lesson, we're going to get started on the lower body and create the intermediate object that we will constrain the pelvis bone to. Let's go ahead and get to it. What I'll do first is control click the controls group so we can deselect it and focus on the properties of the object that we will create. So sometimes you might notice that you have your group's properties here in the properties viewport. All you have to do is just go ahead and deselect the group. That way you can again focus on the properties of other items. What I'll now do is go ahead and match the position of this locator to the pelvis bone. Let's go ahead and search for the locator in our items viewport, and we'll go ahead and just drag and drop. Alright, sweet. Now once we've done that, we'll head over to display. Let's go ahead and change the shape to custom. What I'd like to do here is work with, let's say, a pyramid shape. Now once we've switched this, let's go ahead and set style to replace. And I'll have this project again in the y-axis, but here's what we're going to do just to make sure it's easy to select this object. We'll first go ahead and bring down its size. Let's go ahead and link all three channels, and we'll go ahead and just drop this size down. And now watch this. We can use the offset to kind of bring this down just a bit more. So we'll go to our offset Y channel, and we'll start to just drop this so it is easy to grab this control. Sweet. I might go ahead and drop its size just a little bit more. And I think that that's going to work out very well. Nice. Next, I'll go ahead and uncheck solid. And we'll go ahead and recolor the wireframe. So we'll go to 3D items, draw options, and we'll use red. Alright, sweet. Now let's say we rename this object. So that's going to be enum pelvis. From there, we'll want to make sure it gets parented to the center of gravity control. So I'll go ahead and shift select that control object and press the P key. Now we can press the F key to find the object that we have selected. I'll go ahead and expand the center of gravity so we can go ahead and find our pelvis control. Let's head over to our properties viewport. Great. So have a look. Everything is nice and clean. And why is the position clean? Well, keep in mind that we've parented to an object that shares the same position. So what this means is that there is no positional offset between the child and its parent. Cool stuff. Now once we've managed to do this, it's then time to create the object that the pelvis bone will be constrained to. And that object will then be parented to our pelvis control. So again, we'll go in and create a locator. No need to change its display. We will change its name. That's going to be LOC DRV pelvis. All right, sweet. And then from there, we know we need to match its transforms over to the pelvis bone. All right, super cool. Once we've managed to do this, it's basically time to enter into setup mode so we can constrain the pelvis bone. So let's go ahead and grab the bone object. We'll control click our locator and we'll apply a rotation constraint. We'll also apply a position constraint. So let's go ahead and control click the locator again. And now we can test out our locator. Let's go ahead and grab it. We'll exit setup mode. Let's go ahead and start to move that around. So take a look, we can kind of shift the hips now. Cool stuff. Okay, so from here, I'd like to now make sure that this locator is going to be underneath the hierarchy of our pelvis control. Again, it's safe to enter into setup mode. With the locator selected, we'll then go ahead and parent to our control object. And once we've done that, let's go ahead and exit setup mode. Notice all is well. Let's go ahead and grab our control. Let's test this out. So we should be able to rotate and translate as well. How nice is that? Great. So we've created a cool control object here that is easy to select. So animators will appreciate that. We have some cleanup work to do. Let's make sure that we add our scale channels to our channel lock groups. We'll go ahead and double click to highlight them. We'll head over to groups. Let's search for the group that we'd like to add them to. Here we have it. So we'll go ahead and control click the group. Once it has been added to our selection, we'll right click and choose add channels. So we should no longer be able to scale this object. Take a look. We cannot. All right, nice. Let's also make sure that this gets added to our controls group. So we'll go ahead and search for that. It should be at the very bottom. So we'll grab our control object, and with the controls group highlighted, we'll go ahead and right click and choose add items. And if you ever need to, you can go ahead and expand this group, go to items just to check and see what has been added to this list. So this is looking great. Cool. I'll go ahead and now collapse that group. Let's not forget about our locator. So make sure that that gets selected too. If you're having trouble selecting it from the viewport, another way to access it is by grabbing your control, and then you can pick walk by pressing the down arrow. That allows you to move through your hierarchy. So now with it selected, we can find the hidden group. Let's go ahead and make sure that gets selected. I'll control click it. We'll now right click and we'll choose add items. All right, sweet. So this is working out very well. This rig is coming together. Let's say we go ahead and move to another area that is going to be less challenging before we get to the limbs, because remember, the limbs, this is going to require a bit more work, especially when we start to set up our foot roll. So before we get to the legs, I'd like to go ahead and show you how we'll rig the neck and head, because we'll use that technique